today known as BP. What happened to that man? He was overthrown in what they came to call the White Revolution, and in brought the Shah, backed by the British and the United States, because he wanted to nationalize the oil. What happened when in Venezuela, Venezuelan democracy delivered them Hugo Chavez? Do they like that democracy? I don't think so. Palestinian democracy delivered Hamas. Do they like that democracy? I don't think so. Lebanese democracy, some semblance of democracy, has given us an empowered Hezbollah who believe in resistance against the occupier, and drove the Israelis from their land. Does the United States like that democracy? I don't think so. In Japan recently, you had a prime minister, democratically elected, who demanded, he was actually elected on the basis that he wanted the military base, the US military base in Okinawa, to leave. This is why he was elected. A military base that has been there since the horrors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the nuclear bombing of Japan in the Second World War. He demanded that military base be gone. He was elected because he wanted that military base gone. What happened to that prime minister? He's not there anymore. Because you see, when we are talking about democracy, democracy amongst the subjects of the empire would mean an end to empire. It would mean an end to the North American empire. And all those that have the interest of equality don't believe there should be an empire. Imperialism doesn't serve any of us. It doesn't serve one person in this room. Now, what is happening in Egypt now is they are trying to maintain the status quo. And the status quo is allowing the further expansion of Israel. The status quo is the continuing and the prostituting of their land to the US military whenever and however it wants it. The status quo is the selling of Egypt's natural gas at 1/4 of its value to the state of Israel. That is the status quo in Egypt. So this situation, not only is that happening, they're trying to shock doctrine the situation and allow Egypt's economy to be continually raped by the IMF over the coming years by this situation. The Egyptian people are rebelling and revolting to free themselves from neo-colonial rule, not allow themselves to become further entrenched within neo-colonial rule. And there are two forces at the moment. There is the force pushing and there is the force pulling. Now, what we have to understand is the United States' interest, the interest of the imperialists, the interest of Britain will not succeed because the people are opposed to it. The people were opposed to it at Camp David, and they're still opposed to it now. They're still opposed to it now. So, you know, this is the issue. Also, Mr. Jody McIntyre mentioned Diego Garcia. Well, I think us as citizens of this country, as people that carry British passports, how many of us even know about Diego Garcia? Not many of us. And this is an incredible tragedy. You're talking about a place just off Mauritius that was a former colony of the British. Well, officially it still is a colony of the British. And the British depopulated that island. It had over 2,000 people on it. They depopulated that island in order to give the land to the US military to build one of its biggest military bases in the world. And today, no journalists are allowed anywhere near that island. And the people are, of course, not allowed to return home, which is their right under international law, just as the Palestinians have a right to return home under international law. We are not saying anything radical. We are not saying anything complicated. We are not saying anything particularly militant. We are merely talking about what has been put forth as international law. Why isn't it being observed? Why isn't it being kept? Why has the United States boycotted the International Criminal Court? So, the people of Diego Garcia today don't look upon the Queen of England very fondly. Neither did the Aboriginal people of what we now call Australia. Neither did the Palestinian people of what we now call Israel. So this is the situation. And if we talk about Zionism, there's a lyric of mine which I feel has been greatly misunderstood. I said there's nothing more anti-Semitic than Zionism. And I stand by those words. But what is Zionism? Well, many people view the founder of Zionism as Theodor Herzl, a man who wrote a book called The Judenstaat in 1896. He wrote that book. At this time, the land we now call Palestine, the place we call Jordan, the place we call Lebanon, the place we call Syria, the place we call Iraq, was all, there were no borders dividing it. It was under the Ottoman rule. But then, when the First World War broke out, you had the British playing both sides. The Turks were on the opposing side to the British at this point. So the British thought, okay, how can we best conquer this land? Mr. Lawrence of Arabia, Thomas Edward Lawrence, encouraged Arab nationalism amongst the people of what we now call Iraq, the people of what we call Palestine, the people of what we call Syria, and said that if you fight against your Turkish rulers, we will give you independence, as if independence could ever be given. Independence is taken. We will give you your own countries. But at the same time, the Zionist movement, which between the writing of Theodor Herzl's book, had grown powerful, much more powerful. The British government needed the US on their side to help them win the First World War. They needed the US Army to join them. So what happened was, the foreign minister, the British foreign minister, Mr. Balfour, wrote something, a very historic document, which is now known as the Balfour Declaration. It was a letter to a banker in the United States with the second name Rothschild. Now, the Balfour Declaration stated that the British government would view with favor the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine. Of course, the founder of Zionism, Theodor Herzl, by this time was dead. He is a hero in modern-day Israel. So, you see, the British had on one side the Palestinians fighting alongside them for their independence, but they had on the other side made a promise to a banker in the United States. And what did that promise to the banker in the United States equal? It equaled the United States Army joining in the First World War. Remember, this was a letter written to a banker. So you had the US Army joining the British. You had ultimately Zionist interests and Arab nationalist interests coinciding at the same time on the side of the British. After the First World War, the British and the French sliced up the Middle East, or what we call the Middle East. The Sykes-Picot, or Pichot, maybe, as the French pronounce it. They sliced up the Middle East into mandates. So you had the British Mandate of Mesopotamia, which is what we now call Iraq. But you also had the British Mandate of Palestine. From 1919 onwards, it was called the British Mandate of Palestine. And it was still the British Mandate of Palestine up until 1948. But between the end of the First World War and 1948, many things happened. Many things happened. And it's important to realize that off the back of the Holocaust, the State of Israel was founded. But what happened prior to that? In 1933, and this is a publicly accessible piece of information. This is not anything that is, I'm not lying to you when I say this. There is something called the Havara Agreement, which was signed